Okay. I'll just do a brief intro and then we'll get right into it. And this meeting only lasts till like 5 or 5:10 anyway. So,
Yeah, I've got to get off at 5, but let's
okay.
get on here. Good.
Okay. Three, two, one. Hey everyone, welcome back to Youth R Us. I'm Raj, your host, and I'm here with Mr. McKibben. Do you want to do a quick introduction?
My name's Bill McKibben. Um, I'm a writer. I wrote the first book about what we now call global warming way back in the 1980s. I'm an activist. I organized 350.org, the first big global climate campaign. And since I'm an old person, now I organize other old people. We started a thing called Third Act 3 years ago to organize people over the age of 60 for action on climate and democracy. And we've got about 120,000 people across the country now engaged in that work. And I'm a professor at Middlebury College in Vermont.
Yeah, cool. Thank you for joining us here today. The first thing I want to go into is straight into your work. So, when did you first start noticing the environment being an issue, and what was like the motive for you caring about it when you were younger?
When I first got out of college, I went to work at a magazine called The New Yorker. Um, And the first long piece I wrote for the New Yorker, Raj, was about where everything in my apartment came from. I followed you know, consolidated Edison's oil supply back to Brazil and was up in the Arctic looking at the hydro projects. And I was along New York City's water supply system and out with the garbage barges and things. And all of it made me understand what a physical world we live in. I'd grown up in the suburbs, which are kind of a machine for hiding the workings of the world away so you don't notice them. But now I had a strong sense of just how physical the world was. And so when I started reading in the mid to late 1980s, the first emerging scientific papers on climate change, I read them in a different mood than I otherwise might have. I think I understood all of a sudden that this might be a real threat because we were, we depend on the Earth operating the way it always has.
Okay. And so was this sort of like an abstract issue at first that you noticed and started caring about? When did it become,
When
I
we
guess, your life's work in a way?
Well, pretty quickly, my life's work. I wrote the first book about it all, a book called The End of Nature that came out in the late 1980s and was in 24 languages and a bestseller all over the place and things. And that sort of set me on the course of grappling with this problem for the rest of my life. Um, in the early days, it was abstract because the planet really was just in the earliest phases of heating, and it was hard to really physically notice it. So we were warning more about what would happen in the future. Now, sadly, all those warnings are coming true.
Yeah. And since it was so abstract, what did you see about or back then that most people didn't see, I guess, about the environment?
Well, I think in those days, I was just being very uh, uh, careful about reading the science and talking to the scientists, which most people didn't have as much access to. And my job was to try and kind of communicate that science as best I could. But to me, the science was extremely persuasive and sadly has proven to be correct, as I said.
Yeah. No, that is unfortunate, but
I
and
would like to have been wrong.
yeah. No, definitely. And what's like what's something that you thought maybe that would happen or a prediction that you had made earlier that maybe you had to change, I guess, for better or for worse?
So the only real changes have been that things are happening faster than we would have otherwise thought. So the big changes in the Arctic and the Antarctic, in the 1980s, we were thinking that probably they'd be happening after 2050, but in fact, they're happening much more quickly, and we can see them very dramatically now. Scientists tend to be very conservative in their estimation of things. So they've as a result, the kind of most common phrase used by climate scientists now when they look at the world is faster than expected. Such and such is happening faster than expected.
Okay. And kind of speaking, I guess, on this um idea of, scientists starting to write more, because I'm pretty sure it's obvious now that everyone knows about climate change, everyone knows that this is a problem. But what do you think?
Everyone, the president seems not to have gotten the message. Yeah.
Well, maybe some people care more and less about this
Yeah.
problem, but I feel like everyone understands that there is an issue that exists with how we're treating the environment. So, and I mean, you've written for decades. So, what do you think makes climate communication actually land with everyday people? What do you think helps everyday people understand that this is an issue?
Well, I've lived my whole life in rural America. In some ways, it's easiest here because people are very attuned to the progress of the seasons and how hot or how wet or things it is. Where I live, for instance, we've had really wicked flooding 2 of the last 3 summers. And so people are quite attuned and aware. They tend not to understand, I think, how fast this is happening. And they tend not to understand how easy it would be to fix it. Um, how cheap and affordable clean energy is now, for instance. So those are the things that we have a lot of work to do left to communicate, I think.
Okay. And do you think that, how do I word this? That people advocating for climate change and raising awareness for the issue, is there like a mistake that you see those advocates making that they should be targeting one way of communicating the issue and they're doing something wrong?
No, not really. I think the only mistake is to underestimate the scale of the disinformation campaign from the fossil fuel industry,
Mhm.
something that we've been coping with for decades. So, it's that makes it hard. It's that doesn't exist in most other countries in the world, and so there's not the same problems we have here. If you go to the rest of the world, people, environmental campaigns have been pretty much the same, and everybody understands that global warming is real and a difficulty. Here we have, a huge multi-billion-dollar effort to deny it all.
Okay. So I guess with targeting those fossil fuel campaigns and like showing that they're, untrue and kind of taking off this veil, would that be a
Yep.
big,
And we do a lot of that. For instance, there's a great campaign underway now from a group called Clean Creatives that's targeting the advertising agencies and PR firms that work for the oil industry and getting many companies to sign pledges that they won't anymore and that kind of thing. So, yes, your instincts are absolutely right here.
okay. And for people like me, I guess, so for my generation and for kids that are, the new generations, I feel like what we hear a lot of is that climate change is this huge, insurmountable issue. Not like from everyone, obviously, but there's some either media or some things we hear online is that it's like this impossible task that humans have been worsening for so long that we can't do anything about it anymore. So how
Yeah,
would you balance, sorry.
well, I'm just going to say it, it at the moment that's particularly sad because really for the first time we have a big effective tool we can use. Sometime about 3 or 4 years ago, Raj, we crossed some invisible line where it became cheaper to generate power from sun and wind than from burning coal and gas and oil. We live on a planet where the cheapest way to make power is to point a sheet of glass at the sun. And that means that the forces of economic gravity are working in our favor now. That's why China is putting up such record amounts of clean energy, and now India is following them. Um, and it's also why the oil industry is so scared and spent so much money putting Trump in office so he would help them out and try to ward off the conversion to renewable energy. But there's a lot we can do in this country. At Third Act, we're running big campaigns called Simplify Solar to make it cheaper and easier for people to put solar panels on their rooftops. Even with Washington in uh, the grotesque hands that it is at the moment, there's a lot we can get done at the state and local level.
I've also heard that these big these big oil companies are kind of pushing the plastic industry as well, or backing the plastic industry, and that
That's their backup plan because you can use, if you can't sell natural gas because everybody's got a heat pump and an EV and whatever, you can still use natural gas to make more plastic, just what we need. So yeah, they've got big lobbying operations and that to uh, try and make it easier for them to do that.
Okay. Okay. So I kind of want to shift over now
Mhm.
to some of your work like with 350 .org. Is that the full title? 350?
50.org, it takes its odd name from what the scientists tell us is the most carbon we could safely have in the atmosphere, 350 parts per million, a number we're well past, which is why the polar caps are melting and so on.
Okay. So, wow. So when you helped start 350.org, when you helped found it, um, what did you understand or what did you get right, maybe? That
We understood, I mean, we did had no idea what we were doing. It was myself and seven undergraduate students here at Middlebury College who started it. And we just intuited that there might be a niche of people concerned about the climate who hadn't no one had really tried to organize around the world. And so that's what we set out to do. There were seven of these students. There were seven continents. Each one took one. The guy who took the Antarctic also had to take the internet. Um, and, within 2 years, our first big day of action, we had 5,100 simultaneous demonstrations in 181 countries. CNN called it the most widespread day of political action in the planet's history. 350 has gone on to organize about 20,000 demonstrations in every country on earth except North Korea. So we intuited correctly, I think, that there was a constituency out there wanting to see action on this most pressing of issues.
that's first of all, that's awesome. My goodness. And how do you decide what battles to fight? I mean, there's like local policy to change, ban
Yep.
pressure, divestment. How do you figure out what's worth the while, I
But
guess?
one of the things that we've done both at 350.org and at Third Act is consciously organized so that we can do some of both. We set up, there are chapters of 350.org and working groups of Third Act all over the country. So there's a Maryland chapter or a, Illinois chapter or whatever. And those groups spend about half their time doing local stuff, working with the state legislature or city halls to get change needed. And they spend about half their time working on coordinated national campaigns around banks or around, we did a big thing called Sunday last year to popularize clean energy. So um, you need to be able to work at all scales, local, even the scale as small as your house, but also as big as the whole global political system.
Okay. And you mentioned Sunday. Um,
Mm,
yeah, first of all, do you want to like briefly describe what that
sure.
was?
Sunday, we first one took place last fall on the fall equinox. Um, and it was beautiful. 500 events across the country, all dedicated to the idea of spreading the news about clean energy. Now, of course, the day itself is only the beginning. Uh, in the aftermath, we now have bills in 22 state legislatures to legalize this plug-in solar or balcony solar stuff that's swept through Europe, but it's illegal in most of the United States. So we're making real legislative progress too on the back of all those actions and demonstrations.
And would you say that this is like a shift to highlighting solutions, um, like as well as raising awareness for the problem?
Sure, because we finally have a set of solutions that are easy to highlight. Most of the climate fight took place in an environment where fossil fuel was relatively cheap and clean energy relatively expensive. And that's a hard environment to work in. We did what we could to try really and make fossil energy more expensive, carbon taxes and slowing down their infrastructure and divestment and things like that. But now we live in a world where the opposite is true. Renewable energy is cheap and fossil energy is relatively expensive. So now the possibility for getting these solutions out there at scale is much greater. And so, yes, concentrate on
And I think your newest book, also, Here Comes the Sun, argues kind of a similar theme, I guess, that solar, wind, all like renewable energy and batteries have become so cheap that there's really it's the logical option, I guess.
Yes, you have to work very hard, as the Trump administration is working very hard to try and stop it from happening, because left to its own devices, it will happen. Um, it'll happen even here. The problem is that we have so little time to deal with climate change. If we didn't have the press of climate change upon us, then we could just afford to wait for this whole process to play out just based on pure economics. 40 years from now, we'll run the planet on sun and wind. But if it takes us anything like 40 years to get there, it'll be a broken planet that we run on sun and wind. So our job, I think, is to speed that up.
And I feel, I mean, obviously now it's cheaper to, buy renewable energy sources instead of relying on fossil fuels. But I feel like a lot of people still don't understand that this is the more viable and the more logical and the
We've called it
better
alternative
option.
energy for a long time. And I think that got stuck in our heads, that it was marginal or alternative or hippie or something like that. But around the world now, about 95% of new electric generation last year came from sun and wind and batteries. And just place after place, we're seeing it take off. Uh, they've got so many solar panels in Australia now that beginning in June, all Australians are going to get 3 free hours of electricity every afternoon. I mean, that's the kind of world we're capable of building.
Okay. So what I'm hearing is it's completely viable that we can use it, but I want to ask where you see the biggest bottleneck, I guess. So would it be misinformation? Would it be the finances? Would it be the politics of implementing this? Is it like
Yeah, I mean, at this
one of
point,
these
the
things?
biggest bottleneck is the absolute all-out opposition of the federal government.
Okay.
Um, they're literally shutting down wind farms that are 90% complete off the Atlantic seaboard, making it impossible to site solar farms and things on much of the country. This is only true in the United States. The rest of the world is busily building this stuff out. But in this country, the biggest obstacle is a corrupt federal government.
And since, I mean, Youth R Us, this podcast is meant to, give ideas to young advocates who are passionate about either sustainability or civic engagement, education, anything like that. When you feel frustrated, or I guess if you were a teenager and if you were feeling frustrated about wanting to get your voice out about something, how would you convert that frustration into something useful?
Well, it's always useful to think about how to get messages across. It's really important. And young people have been incredibly good at that. I mean, you've heard of Greta Thunberg, um, one of my favorite people in the world, someone I love working with. She was in junior high when she figured out that, if adults were not creating a world that she could safely grow old in, there was no need for her to be going to school, wasting her time going to school for training for a career that, didn't make sense. So she just said, I'm not going to school, and sat down on the steps of the Swedish parliament. And within a year or two, there were 10 million young people joining in these school strikes around the world. It really got the message out and pushed hard. So I don't think young people have any problem coming up with good stuff to do. My work's mostly now to make sure that there are old people to back them up. As old people come with their own uses, lots of connections, a lifetime of skill at various things. And we have a good memory that change can happen. You know, we're in our third act now, but it means that in our first act, when we were your age, it was the 1960s and the 1970s. And we got to see, the apex of the civil rights movement. We got to see the first Earth Day when 20 million Americans, 10% of the then population, were out in the street. So we know that it's possible to make big changes.
Great. And one thing I like that you just mentioned there, about the organization Third Act. So, do you think that intergenerational partnership would work really well in practice?
Yep. First big demonstration we did at Third Act. 4 years ago, before we were even quite fully formed, was came when a group of young people called Fridays for the Future said, we want to be taking on the big banks, Chase, Citi, Wells Fargo, Bank of America, that are the biggest funders of the fossil fuel industry. We want to take them on, but we're in high school. We don't have credit cards. We don't have checking accounts. Will you help? And I was like, of course we'll help. We have a lot of credit cards. And so the very first demonstration was in Boston, and there were several hundred high school kids outside Citibank, um, downtown Boston. High school kids, in my experience, understand the barrel of the gun down which they're staring. And the high school kids were somewhat sprier, so they were at the head of the march. But at the end, there were a bunch of us from this, new third act thing, and we just had a big banner that said "Fossils against fossil fuels." Um, and all the kids who saw it were laughing, and it was a good example of how older people can figure out how to back up younger people in this fight. We ended up sponsoring this day of action against the banks all across America in 100 cities. In Washington, where I was, we had thousands of old people out, and we were sitting in to close down the banks for the day. But we're too old to just sit on the sidewalk easily all day. So we'd gone to the Goodwill, and we had hundreds and hundreds of rocking chairs. And that's what we were using to do our sit in. The New York Times had a big story the next day about the rocking chair rebellion that was underway.
That's amazing. Um, yeah, so I mean, I do a bit of sustainability work myself. I have an organization called Better Planet for Kids, and we do education stuff. We work on civic engagement to get kids involved with volunteering opportunities. And then a lot of what we do is also environmental work. So policy making, we do a lot of testimony, we do cleanups, all that sort of stuff. But I always get like friends of mine coming up to me and saying, I care about all these topics and I'm passionate about them, but I don't know where to start. So
Yep. You're starting in just the right place. Organizing is the place to start. As individuals, we're essentially powerless. The most important thing an individual can do is be a little less of an individual, and join together with others in movements large enough to make a difference. And that's what you're doing. But one of the things you'll find is that those organizations get endlessly more effective the more they're coordinated with other organizations in big, broad coalitions.
so okay. So essentially join a group, be bigger, be a bigger voice. Yeah.
There's
Okay.
nothing, there's no secret to it. It's just gotta gotta get it done.
And what would be your advice for youth in communities where maybe climate action is unpopular for any reason?
Then in that case, talk about energy action. Um, as I say, I live in rural America, and I've lived in red state and blue state. So I have lots of neighbors who have Trump flags on the mailbox. But a bunch of them also have solar panels on the roof. And it's not necessarily because they care about climate. It's more like my house is my castle, and it's a better castle with its own independent power supply. So that's another way for people to work and think about, how to get their neighbors and stuff enthused about clean energy.
Okay.
Cheap.
And
You don't have to rely on some big utility, some big government to make it happen. In fact, it should be more appealing in many ways to conservatives than to liberals.
okay. So if you have other people nearby, group up. If you feel like you're outnumbered, then you can start framing it in a different way, I guess.
Good points.
Okay. And I don't want to take up too much of your time. I know we're getting closer to the end here. Um, let's see. Oh, okay. So you've done a lot of civil disobedience. I mean, you just mentioned the rocking chair rebellion. When do you think that it is strategic, and when do you think that it gets too much or it backfires?
I think that civil disobedience is one tool in the activist toolkit. Like any tool, you shouldn't use it too often because it gets dull, literally and metaphorically. There are times when it is useful, and those are times when you need to underline the moral urgency of something. Say, this is so important that people are willing to go to jail for it. And then people do sometimes pay attention to that. So I think used effectively, it can be a really important tool. Just don't uh, mistake it for the main work, which is always going to be lobbying, letter writing, all the more prosaic and mundane forms of organizing.
Okay. And from in your experience, I mean, you've been doing this for a while. What do you think, or strategies or tools, I guess, are rising in effectiveness, and what do you think is maybe falling behind that people
Yeah.
shouldn't use too much?
Well, people have spent a lot of work over the last 15 years on social media campaigning. I, I think that some of that may be past its peak a little bit now.
Mhm.
At the very beginning, it was great, because it was new and fresh, but I don't know. I mean, it's still important, but I think probably face-to-face organizing in many ways is coming back into style. Um, we always think that lots of art and music are really helpful in this work because you got to appeal to the half of your brain that likes, statistics, but also to the visceral half that responds more emotionally.
Okay. So, I mean, I guess it's always changing anyway. So we're gonna see new tools in, I
New
guess, the
tool.
next 15 years. And
Look, we saw fantastic tools, people doing amazing work in Minneapolis these last few weeks. Who would have thought that the whistle would become, the most important tool of nonviolent resistors in 2026?
definitely, I mean, that kind of brings us back almost 50 years, I guess,
Yep.
to um like the trumpet era.
Yep.
But okay, I got to keep track of time. Let's go straight to the rapid fire, I guess, before
Yeah.
we end things out. So, what is one climate myth? And I guess we've talked a lot about, renewable energy is inexpensive. So maybe besides that myth, that you would want to delete from the internet or modern day forever.
Um, I think I'd want people to understand that natural gas, is not any better than coal. Too often, people have decided to try and, hold up natural gas, but it produces too much methane and does as much global warming damage as coal, just as bad as coal.
Okay. And number two, the what is the best advice you've ever gotten, maybe specifically in advocacy?
Um, when we fight, we often win. And sometimes we don't realize that because the odds seem daunting and things, but it turns out that when you organize for a fight, uh, we are often able to beat the bad guys.
I think I'm gonna steal that quote. When we
Yeah.
fight, we often win. And then lastly, this is a weirder one. What is a debate that you think activists should not spend their time on?
I don't spend my time debating people about whether or not climate change is real. It's never a good faith debate. Everybody who studies it knows that it's real, and these are just you know, uh, corrupt representatives of the fossil fuel industry trying to slow things down.
Okay. And what is one thing you're genuinely still curious about regarding the climate movement?
Regarding the climate movement or regarding climate science?
Honestly, anything.
Um, I am curious about how how fast the poles are going to melt. And I'm a little worried that the evidence seems to show things are speeding up rather dramatically now.
Okay. Yeah, no, that is definitely worrying. Uh, And then I guess this last one, when you imagine a young listener wanting to take action after this episode, what do you hope that they do in the next 48 hours?
Find some other people.
Find some other people.
This is America's default is towards individualism at all times. What can I do? What can I do in my house? I'm glad that my house is covered with solar panels. I'm glad that they connect to an EV in the garage. I don't try to fool myself that we're going to solve this thing one Tesla at a time. In fact, at the moment, the fewer Teslas, the better. given Elon Musk. Um, uh, we win when we come together in numbers big enough to change some of the political and economic ground rules here.
Okay. And on that note, I think this meeting is also about to run out soon. But
Raj, what a pleasure to talk, man, and many thanks for this good work. Thank all your colleagues, and I'll look forward to getting to work side by side in the time ahead.
and thank you so much. Really, it's an honor to have you on. I mean, you've done so much work. You're known worldwide for the amount of influence you've given to the climate movement. So really, really thank you.
Back at you, man. Take care.
Yeah. Bye-bye. Bye, everyone.